The chandelier above the Grand Meridian Ballroom had never witnessed silence like this. One moment, 500 of Seoul's most powerful men and women were drinking, laughing, sealing deals behind expensive smiles. The next, every glass was lowered. Every whisper died. Every eye in the room cut to the same point, the raised platform at the north end of the hall, where Chairman Oh Seung-won stood with a microphone in one hand and a document in the other, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had buried rivals for sport. "Gentlemen," the chairman said, adjusting his glasses with two fingers, "I would like to remind everyone here of Article 7 of the syndicate's founding charter." Kang Jae-hoon didn't move. He stood near the edge of the platform, a glass of whiskey in his right hand, his black suit pressed to a razor's edge. He was 31 years old and had run the syndicate's operations for 4 years. He had crushed 3 coup attempts, expanded territory into 6 new districts, and made the organization more profitable than any of his predecessors. He was feared by name, respected by performance, and tonight publicly humiliated. Article 7 states clearly, the chairman continued, his voice amplified through the entire room, that no unmarried man may hold executive leadership of the syndicate beyond his 32nd birthday. Jae-hoon turns 32 in 48 hours. Murmurs tore through the crowd. Jae-hoon's jaw tightened. He had known about Article 7. What he hadn't known, what none of his informants had caught, was that Oh Seung-won was going to weaponize it tonight, in front of every council member, every rival family head, every journalist with a press pass and a phone camera. "He has 48 hours, the chairman said, folding the document with theatrical care, to present a lawful spouse, or he forfeits leadership of the syndicate to the council. Someone in the crowd laughed, just once, short and sharp like the crack of a whip. Jae-hoon didn't look for who it was. He raised his whiskey glass slowly, took a single measured sip, and set it down on the nearest table with a quiet click. Then he turned and walked off the platform without a word. The crowd parted around him like water. His advisor, Park Sung-min, fell into step beside him before he reached the door. Sung-min was 47, had 3 gray hairs for every difficult decision he'd ever made, and was currently accumulating more at a visible rate. "Boss," Sung-min said quietly, "we have a problem." "I know what we have. The council has been planning this for months. They waited until the 48-hour window was too tight to challenge legally." "I know that too." They pushed through the side exit into the cold Seoul night. Jae-hoon's car was already waiting. It was always waiting. He stood outside it for a moment, hands in his pockets, staring at the city lights smearing against the dark sky. "We need to find you a wife," Sung-min said. "Brilliant observation. Tonight, we need to start tonight." Jae-hoon turned to look at him. "And what exactly do you suggest? We can't manufacture a marriage certificate and expect the chairman to accept it. He'll have it verified within the hour." "We don't need to manufacture anything." Sung-min loosened his collar. "We need a real woman, a real registration, and 47 hours left. I have a list." Jae-hoon got in the car. By midnight, he had reviewed 6 names. Senator Yoon's eldest daughter, who wanted a government alliance and made no effort to hide it. An actress named Choi Da-yoon, who had texted her manager within 30 seconds of being approached and asked how the public would react. A businesswoman from Busan, whose father was currently under syndicate pressure regarding a debt. 2 women from allied families. 1 woman from a rival family whose motives required no further analysis. Jae-hoon closed the folder. "No," he said. Sung-min stared at him. "Boss, you understand what no means right now. Every single one of them wants something that has nothing to do with me. I marry any of them. I spend the next year being leveraged, manipulated, or watched. You spend the next year alive and in power. That's not the trade I'm making." Sung-min rubbed his face with both hands. "Then what trade are you making?" Jae-hoon didn't answer. He turned to look out the window as the car moved through the city. The streets were mostly quiet now, a few restaurants still glowing, taxis sliding past intersections. Seoul at 2 in the morning looked almost ordinary, nothing like the place he'd spent his entire adult life turning into a territory. "Take me for a drive," he said. "Boss, not a long one, just drive." If you're already hooked on this story, drop a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. Now back to Jae-hoon. The car moved without destination for 20 minutes before Jae-hoon saw the light. It came from a narrow clinic on a side street off Mapo-gu, a small place with a hand-painted sign and the kind of fluorescent glow that meant someone was still working. What made Jae-hoon look twice wasn't the light. It was the argument happening just inside the glass front door. "Stop," he said. The driver stopped. Through the glass, Jae-hoon could see a woman in a medical coat, young, dark-skinned, natural hair pulled back, clipboard in hand, standing across from a man in an administrator's uniform. The administrator was gesturing toward a seated patient, an elderly man who looked exhausted and small, like someone who had stopped expecting good news. Jae-hoon rolled down the window. He couldn't hear the words clearly, but the body language was plain. The administrator wanted the patient removed. The woman in the medical coat was not moving. She pointed at the clipboard. The administrator shook his head. She pointed again, this time at the patient, then back at the clipboard, her posture leaving no room for interpretation. She was not asking. She was not pleading. She was standing in the doorway of her argument like it was a wall she had personally built and had zero intention of demolishing. The administrator threw up his hands and walked away. The woman turned back to the patient, crouched to his level, said something that made the old man's shoulders drop with relief. Then she stood, made a note on her clipboard, and disappeared down the corridor. Jae-hoon sat in the car for a long moment. "Who is she?" he asked. Sung-min, who had been watching from the passenger seat, was already on his phone. "Give me 10 minutes." It took 7. Her name was Nia Okafor, 28 years old. Nigerian-born, raised in Lagos, completed her undergraduate degree in Ibadan, received a scholarship for her medical internship in Seoul 14 months ago. No criminal record, no political affiliations, no family connections to any known organization. Currently renting a small apartment in Mapo-gu, 3 blocks from the clinic. "She's nobody," Sung-min said, meaning it as a problem. Jae-hoon heard it as something else entirely. He got out of the car. The clinic's front desk was unmanned at this hour. Jae-hoon walked past it without slowing, following the corridor until he heard movement behind a curtained bay, the quiet efficiency of someone who worked alone and preferred it that way. He stopped at the edge of the curtain. "Dr. Okafor." The curtain pulled back sharply. Nia stood with a blood pressure cuff in one hand and the expression of someone who had already had a long night and was prepared to make it longer if necessary. She looked at him, really looked, the way people rarely did with Jae-hoon, most eyes skipping away too quickly out of instinct. "The clinic is closed to walk-ins after 11, she said. "Are you injured?" "No." "Then you'll need to come back during. I watched you argue with the administrator earlier about the patient." She paused. "Are you from hospital management?" "No." "Then I'm not sure why that's your business." "It isn't," Jae-hoon said. "I'm here for a different reason." He glanced at the patient behind her, the same elderly man from earlier, now resting with an IV line in his arm. "He's being treated." "He is." "Good." Jae-hoon looked back at her. "My name is Kang Jae-hoon. I'd like 5 minutes of your time when you're finished here." Something shifted in her expression, not recognition, not fear, more like assessment. She was measuring him the way a doctor measures a patient who hasn't been honest about their symptoms yet. "5 minutes," she said. "Wait outside." He waited. 12 minutes later she came through the front door, coat still on, arms crossed against the night air. She looked at him, then at the black car idling at the curb, then back at him. "Kang Jae-hoon," she said, like she was trying the name for fit. "You don't know who I am." "Should I?" "Most people in this city do." I've been in this city 14 months. She said, I work 12-hour shifts. I don't follow local news. So no, I don't know who you are, and that doesn't embarrass me. What's your 5-minute reason? Jae-hoon looked at her for a moment. In his entire life, no one had spoken to him quite like this, not rudely, not aggressively, just completely without performance. She wasn't trying to impress him or soften him or read his reaction. She was simply present, waiting, a little cold and entirely real. He said it plainly. I need a wife. Tonight, ideally, I'm offering a contract marriage, 12 months, financially compensated, no interference in your personal or professional life, security provided for you and any immediate family. Nia stared at him. Then she laughed, a short, genuine sound, like she hadn't expected to find anything funny today and was annoyed that she had. Okay, she said, I'm going back inside. I'm not joking. She stopped, turned back, read his face. You're not joking. I have 46 hours left. A council of men I've spent 4 years managing wants to remove me from power using an obscure charter rule about marital status. I need a legally registered spouse. The women I've been presented with tonight all have agendas that would compromise my position further. You have none. You don't know anything about me. I know you spent 20 minutes fighting for a patient who can't pay his bill at 2 in the morning, Jae-hoon said. That tells me enough. Nia was quiet for a moment. The night air moved between them. Somewhere down the street, a car horn sounded and faded. No, she said. Whatever is happening in your world, I want no part of it. I'm sorry about your 46 hours. She turned and walked back into the clinic. Jae-hoon stood on the pavement alone. Behind him, Sung-min had rolled down the car window. Boss. I heard her. Jae-hoon walked back to the car. Find me a hotel, I need to sleep. And the wife situation. Tomorrow. But tomorrow arrived ugly. At 9 in the morning, Jae-hoon's phone had 14 missed calls from council members and one text from Chairman Oh that read simply, tick-tock. 2 major news outlets had run the story with photographs from the ballroom. One headline read, Seoul's most feared man can't find a bride. There was a comment section. Jae-hoon did not read the comment section. By noon, Sung-min had exhausted the secondary list. 7 more names, 7 more compromised situations. A prosecutor's niece, a chaebol heiress, a woman whose brother worked directly for the rival family that had already begun making territorial moves in anticipation of Jae-hoon's fall. Jae-hoon sat in his office on the 43rd floor and looked out at Seoul below him, quiet and enormous and completely indifferent to his 40 remaining hours. Then Sung-min walked in with a different expression, not the frantic look of a man managing disaster, but something more careful. There's been a development, Sung-min said, regarding Dr. Akafor. Jae-hoon turned from the window. Her younger brother, Emeka Akafor, 23 years old, currently studying in Seoul on a student visa, witnessed something last Tuesday he shouldn't have. He was near the Dongdaemun warehouse district, wrong time, wrong street. He saw a vehicle transfer that connects to the Bay faction. Sung-min paused. The Bay faction knows he saw it. They've been watching him since Thursday. Jae-hoon was very still. Is he in immediate danger? Not yet, but within a few days, yes. The Bay faction doesn't leave loose threads. Jae-hoon looked out the window again. The city below shimmered in the afternoon light, beautiful and full of invisible machinery. Send someone to watch the brother, he said. Quietly, don't approach him. Sung-min hesitated, and Dr. Akafor. Jae-hoon was quiet for a moment, set up a meeting. Nia was eating lunch alone at a Pajangmacha 3 streets from the clinic when Sung-min found her. She looked up from her rice, clocked him immediately as someone official and out of place, and put her spoon down. Tell your boss I already said no, she said. There's something you need to know, Sung-min said, about your brother. That got her attention. She arrived at Jae-hoon's building 30 minutes later, not escorted, not impressed, walking through the lobby like she was doing it a favor. Jae-hoon met her in the conference room on the 42nd floor. No guards in the room, no performance. Just 2 chairs, a table, and daylight through floor-to-ceiling glass. Nia sat down and looked at him without preamble. What about Emeka? Jae-hoon told her. Everything. What Emeka had seen, what the Bay faction was, what they typically did to people who had inconvenient information. He didn't soften it. She wouldn't have respected him for softening it. When he finished, Nia was quiet for a long time. Her hands were folded on the table, and she was staring at a point between them, working something out behind her eyes that Jae-hoon couldn't read. How do I know any of this is true, she asked, and not a story designed to pressure me? You don't, Jae-hoon said. Not yet. I can have my team show you evidence, surveillance photos, communications intercepts, the vehicle transfer record. But you'd have to trust that the evidence is real, and you have no reason to trust me. He paused. What I can tell you is that whether you agree to my proposal or not, I've already sent people to watch your brother. That's not conditional. She looked up at him sharply. That costs me nothing, he continued. He saw something connected to a faction I'm already in conflict with. Keeping him safe is in my interest regardless. So the protection is guaranteed either way. The protection is guaranteed. The proposal is separate. Nia leaned back in her chair. She looked at the city behind him, towers of glass and steel, the Han River glinting far below, Seoul sprawling in every direction like it had no intention of ending. Then she looked back at Jae-hoon. If I agree, she said, I need it in writing, every condition, clearly. Of course. Emeka gets round-the-clock protection until the threat from this Bay faction, you said, is resolved. Not just while the contract is active, until it's resolved. Agreed. The marriage lasts exactly 1 year from the date of registration. Not a day more without my written consent. Agreed. I keep my internship, my schedule, my life. I am not available as a prop for events or appearances beyond what's legally necessary to satisfy your counsel's requirements. Jae-hoon almost smiled. Agreed. I want a separate room. The East Wing has 4. I want the one furthest from yours. This time he did smile briefly, and she saw it. Something shifted slightly in her expression, not warmth, but a recalibration. Like she'd expected him to resist that condition and was mildly surprised that he hadn't. One more thing, Nia said. At the end of the year I walk away, no complications, no extensions, no sudden new reasons I need to stay. Jae-hoon looked at her steadily. When the contract ends, you're free. That's not something I'd argue. Then I want it in the document anyway. Done. She took a breath. Call your lawyers. By 6 in the evening, the contract was drafted, reviewed by Nia's chosen independent counsel, a sharp woman she'd found through her embassy contact within the hour, which Jae-hoon noted quietly and signed. The marriage was registered through an emergency administrative filing that Sung-min had spent 3 hours arranging across 2 government offices. At 7:55 in the evening, with 26 hours remaining on the council's deadline, Kang Jae-hoon and Nia Okafor were legally married. They stood in a government registrar's office that smelled faintly of old paper and floor cleaner, with 2 staff members as witnesses and Sung-min, standing near the door trying not to look like he'd been awake for 38 hours straight. The registrar handed them each a copy of the certificate and congratulated them with the practiced warmth of someone who had done this 300 times. Nia looked down at the document in her hands. Jae-hoon watched her face. Whatever she was feeling, she kept it sealed behind a very competent expression. Then she folded the certificate, put it in her coat pocket, and looked up at him. What happens tomorrow? She asked. Tomorrow, Jae-hoon said, we walk into the council meeting together. And they'll accept it. They'll have no choice. She nodded once. Then I'm going home tonight. I have a shift in the morning. A car will take you. I can take a taxi. Dr. Okafor. He said it quietly without pressure. Until the Bay situation is resolved, please use the car. She looked at him for a moment, Then she walked past him toward the door. "Fine," she said, "but I'm choosing the music. If this story is keeping you up, you're not alone. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here when we drop the next one." Now, the council meeting. The syndicate council met at 10 in the morning in a boardroom that had witnessed more power shifts than most governments. 12 men around a table, all of them older than Jai-hoon, most of them hopping, privately or loudly, that today would be the day he finally fell. Chairman Oh sat at the head. He looked, Jai-hoon thought, entirely too comfortable. Jai-hoon arrived at 10 sharp, alone, without Nia. The chairman checked his watch. "You have until 10:30 per the charter." "I'm aware." Whispers circled the table. Someone poured water. Someone else checked their phone beneath the table, already preparing a message. At 10:22, the boardroom door opened. Nia walked in. She wore a deep burgundy dress she'd apparently owned for formal occasions at the hospital. No stylist, no borrowed jewelry, nothing orchestrated. She walked in like herself, which was the most disarming thing she could have done in a room full of people who had spent 40 years performing. She stood beside Jai-hoon. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. "Who," said Council Member Ryu slowly, "is this?" Jai-hoon reached into his jacket and placed the marriage certificate on the table. "My wife." Chairman Oh picked up the certificate. He read it twice. Then he set it down, smoothed it flat with his palm, and looked between Jai-hoon and Nia with an expression that had no name but meant, "I did not expect this particular outcome." "She's not Korean," said Ryu. "The charter specifies a lawful spouse," Jai-hoon said. "It does not specify nationality. She's not from any family." "Also not specified." "She's a..." "My wife," Jai-hoon said again, his voice carrying no heat and all the warning in the room. "You have the registered certificate. You have the government seal. I have fulfilled Article 7 in full and on time. If anyone at this table has a legal objection, I suggest they bring it through proper channels." He looked around the room slowly, landing on each face. "Today." Nobody spoke. Chairman Oh leaned back in his chair and studied Jai-hoon with the particular expression of a man recalibrating. He'd played the Article 7 card expecting a forfeit. He had not planned for this. The miscalculation would cost him influence, and he knew it. He folded his hands. "Article 7 is satisfied," the chairman said finally. "Meeting adjourned." As the council members filed out, Nia stood quietly at Jai-hoon's side. She didn't look triumphant. She looked like a person who had walked into an unfamiliar room, held their ground, and was now quietly processing what that had cost. Only one person remained as the others left, a woman who had been seated near the far end of the table and had not said a single word throughout the entire meeting. Shin Hee-rin, 29 years old, daughter of the Shin family's patriarch, the woman who had been informally understood in certain circles to be Jai-hoon's eventual match. She stood up slowly, straightened her jacket, and looked at Nia with an expression that was perfectly composed and utterly cold. She said nothing to Nia. She looked at Jai-hoon. "Congratulations," she said. The word had a very different shape than the one in the dictionary. Then she walked out. Nia waited until the room was empty before she said anything. Who was that? Someone who expected things to go differently today. Should I be concerned about her? Jai-hoon picked up the certificate from the table. "I'll handle Hee-rin." "That's not an answer." He looked at her. "Yes, you should be aware of her, but you won't be in danger. I won't let you be in danger." Nia absorbed this with the same careful steadiness she seemed to apply to everything. "Okay," she said. "Now what?" "Now," Jai-hoon said, "you come home." His home was a 4-story residence in Seongbuk-dong, understated from the street, enormous from the inside, staffed by people who moved quietly and asked no questions. Nia walked through it the first night with the expression of someone completing a medical assessment. She noted the security cameras, the staff positions, the exits. She chose the East Wing room as agreed, and closed the door at 9:30 after eating dinner alone at the kitchen counter because the formal dining room, she informed Sung-min, was absurd for one person. The first week was a careful distance. Jae-hoon left early and came back late. Nia kept her clinic shifts and came home to the East Wing without looking for conversation. They passed each other occasionally in the kitchen or the hallway, brief, polite, almost formal. Then on the 8th day, Jae-hoon came home at midnight to find Nia sitting on the kitchen counter eating instant ramen and reading a medical journal with her shoes off. He stopped in the doorway. She looked up. "There's another packet if you want one." He should have said no and gone to his office. Instead, he took off his jacket, sat at the counter, and ate instant ramen with his wife at midnight for the first time in his life. They didn't speak much, but the silence was different from the silence of the first week. It had less architecture in it, less intentional structure. It was just two people eating noodles in a kitchen. "Your patient," Jae-hoon said eventually. "The elderly man from the clinic, is he recovering?" Nia looked at him, briefly surprised. "Yes, he was discharged 4 days ago. How do you know about his recovery?" "I had someone check." "You had someone check on my patient?" "I had someone check that the billing issue was resolved," Jae-hoon said. "It seemed like something you'd want handled." Nia stared at him. "Did you pay his bill?" Jae-hoon said nothing, which was an answer. She turned back to her ramen. A long moment passed. "Thank you," she said quietly. He didn't say it was nothing because to her, clearly it wasn't nothing, so he just nodded. That was the first real conversation. After that, they happened more often, not designed, not performed, just occurring in the margins of two people living in close proximity. She asked questions about his organization with the directness of someone who preferred information to imagination. He answered more honestly than he had ever answered anyone, which surprised him consistently. She told him about Lagos, about her father's pharmacy that had closed during an economic downturn, about putting herself and her brother through school on a combination of scholarships and small jobs, about choosing medicine because she believed in it in a way she couldn't articulate without sounding naive, so she usually didn't try. "You don't seem naive about it," Jae-hoon said one evening. They were on the terrace, the city spread below them, the air cold enough to see breath. "Medicine?" she asked. "Any of it? You don't seem naive about anything." "I've had to not be," she said. "Naive doesn't survive much." She glanced at him. "You know that." He did. He'd known it since he was 14 years old. But hearing someone else say it without performing sympathy or expecting anything in return, that was new. He looked at her and felt something shift in his chest that he recognized, dimly and with considerable alarm, as the beginning of a problem. He wasn't supposed to feel anything. That had been the entire architecture of the arrangement. Weeks passed, months followed. Jae-hoon found himself making decisions differently, sitting with problems longer, considering second-order consequences he'd previously dismissed. Once, during a council negotiation, he chose a resolution that cost him a short-term gain, but avoided harm to a group of workers caught between two territorial disputes. Sung-min stared at him for a full minute afterward. "Boss," Sung-min said, "that's not how we usually." "I know," Jae-hoon said. "It's how we're doing it now." He started paying attention to what she paid attention to. He read 2 papers from the medical journal she left on the kitchen counter. He didn't understand all of it, but he read them. She, meanwhile, had quietly adapted to the house, not to the power of it, not to the wealth, but to the rhythms. She knew which kitchen staff arrived earliest. She'd learned Sung-min's actual name and used it, which Sung-min found mildly destabilizing. She had argued with Jae-hoon twice in the span of a month about organizational decisions she'd overheard, and both times, though he'd initially pushed back, he'd come around to her view. "You should have been a prosecutor," he told her after the second time. "I should have been a lot of things," she said. "I chose the thing that mattered most." He wanted to ask what mattered most now. He didn't. because asking that question felt like crossing a line that the contract had drawn, and he had agreed to that contract, and he was, despite every other thing he was, a man who kept his word. But in the quiet moments, in the kitchen at midnight, on the terrace at dusk, in the car when Sung-min drove them both to an event they were required to attend, and the city rolled past in silence, in those moments, Jae-hoon knew exactly what was happening to him. He was falling in love with his contractual wife. And she had exactly 2 months left on the contract. The night before the contract expired, Jae-hoon sat in his office for 3 hours without looking at a single document. He had spent a year making peace with what this would eventually become. He told himself in the early months that the feeling would level off, that proximity created false intimacy and distance would correct it. He told himself in the middle months that what he felt was gratitude and not love, admiration and not need. He had been wrong on both counts, and he knew it with the same clean certainty he used to know everything else: deals, territory, risk. He loved her, completely and inconveniently, and with no contractual basis whatsoever. The following morning, Nia came to find him. She was already dressed for the clinic, coat on, bag over her shoulder, the composed version of herself that she put on like armor each morning. She found him in the kitchen, standing at the counter with coffee he hadn't touched. "Today's the day," she said. "I know." She set her bag down. For a moment she didn't say anything, and Jae-hoon didn't push into the silence because he was afraid of what filling it would cost him. "My brother is safe," she said. "The Bay situation resolved 3 weeks ago, permanently." "I know, you told me." She looked at him. "You kept every condition." "I said I would." She nodded slowly. She picked up her bag again. "I want you to know," she said, "that this year the contract, it wasn't what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Something transactional, something I'd survive and move past." She paused. "I didn't expect," she stopped. Jae-hoon waited. She shook her head slightly, as if correcting herself, and looked at him with that clear, direct gaze that had disarmed him the first time he'd seen it on a side street in Maplegu at 2 in the morning. "I'm going," she said. He nodded. "I know." She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame, didn't turn back. "Take care of yourself, Jae-hoon," she said. She left. The house, which had been loud with her presence for 12 months, her voice in the kitchen, her footsteps in the east wing, her quiet reading on the terrace, went quiet in a way Jae-hoon had not experienced since before she arrived. He had forgotten what silence felt like when it had nothing in it. Sung-min appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, took one look at Jae-hoon's face, and did not say a single word for almost a full minute. Then, "Boss." "Not now, Sung-min." "Okay." A pause. "Just for what it's worth. She asked about you in the early months when you were working late. She'd ask if you'd eaten." Jae-hoon looked at him. Sung-min shrugged, which was the most communication he'd done with his shoulders in 47 years. "Just for what it's worth," he said again, and left. 3 weeks passed. Jae-hoon ran the syndicate, attended meetings, made decisions, crushed a minor territorial incursion from the Bay faction's remnants with the kind of precision that reminded everyone, briefly, why he'd been feared in the first place. He ate alone at the kitchen counter and thought about a woman who had once sat beside him eating instant ramen and never asked him to be someone he wasn't. On a Thursday evening in late autumn, he made a decision. Not a syndicate decision, not a strategic calculation, just a decision about himself, the kind he hadn't made since he was very young and still believed in choosing things for reasons that had nothing to do with power. He told Sung-min he was going out alone. Sung-min opened his mouth. "Alone," Jae-hoon said. He drove himself, which he hadn't done in 4 years, through streets he knew from the inside out, across the city to a hospital in Maplegu where a certain doctor had recently taken up a permanent position. He parked across the street. He sat in the car and looked at the building. He did not have a plan. He had not prepared anything. He was, for the first time in as long as he could remember, entirely unguarded. At 6:45, Nia came through the hospital's side exit. She had her coat on against the November cold, her bag on her shoulder, looking down at her phone and then up at the street with the particular expression of someone whose mind is already 3 steps ahead of their feet. She walked to the edge of the pavement. She looked up. She saw him. For a moment, neither of them moved. The city went on around them, taxis, pedestrians, the indifferent machinery of Seoul at evening, and in the middle of it, they were very still. Jae-hoon crossed the street. He stopped a few feet from her. He had no prepared words, no negotiated terms, no contractual structure to fall back on. Just himself, on a pavement in the cold, asking for something with no leverage and no guarantee. "You're not supposed to be here," she said. "I know. The contract ended." "I know that too." She looked at him. "Then why are you here?" Jae-hoon held her gaze. "This time," he said quietly, "I'm not asking for a contract." Nia was very still. "Then what are you asking for?" "A real marriage." He let the words stand without dressing them. "Not a deadline, not a trade, not anything you owe me because you don't owe me anything, just if you wanted something real." The wind moved between them. Nia looked at him for a long, long moment. He could see her working through it, the same careful assessment she applied to everything, that thorough and relentless honesty that had made him trust her more than anyone in his life. And then, slowly, something in her face changed. Not dissolved, she was never soft in the easy way, but opened, like a door that had been closed not out of certainty but out of caution, and the caution had finally run out. She laughed, the same short, real sound from the first night, the one he'd thought about more times than he would ever admit. "You drove yourself," she said, glancing at the car. "Yes." "Without security?" "Yes." "Jae-hoon." She shook her head, and her voice held something warm and exasperated and entirely new. "You are such a complicated man." "I know." She looked at him one more time. The city hummed around them. Above, the sky was going dark, the first lights of Seoul beginning to answer it from below. And then Nia Akafer, who had defended a patient at 2 in the morning, who had negotiated a contract with her eyes wide open, who had walked into a room full of the most dangerous men in Seoul without flinching, reached out and took his hand. "Then let's try a real one," she said. "If this story moved you, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment and tell us, did you know she was going to say yes?"